He walked in, but never walked out. At 1:55 a.m. on April 1, 2006, security cameras captured 27-year-old medical student Brian Schaffer saying goodbye to two women outside a Columbus bar, then casually strolling back inside to talk to the band. Those grainy frames would become the last confirmed sighting of a man who defied the laws of physics. Brian Schaffer enters the Ugly Tuna Saloon on surveillance footage, crystal clear, undeniable proof. He walks through the main entrance, past multiple cameras, into the packed second-floor establishment, but here's where reality breaks down. He never appears on any camera leaving. The Ugly Tuna Saloon occupied the second floor of a Columbus building with security cameras monitoring every public exit. When the bar closed at 2 a.m., dozens of patrons streamed out through the main entrance, all captured on video. Staff members left through service doors, recorded. Even the cleaning crew departing at dawn, documented. But Brian Schaffer? Invisible. How does a 6'2" man weighing 170 pounds vanish from a monitored building with limited exits? The surveillance system that should have solved this mystery instead created an impossible puzzle. His friends searched every corner of the bar, calling his phone over and over. Security guards checked bathrooms, storage rooms, every possible hiding spot. Police would later tear apart the entire building looking for answers. If this already has you curious, hit like and stay with me, because 19 years later, investigators still cannot explain how Brian Schaffer left that bar without being seen. The mathematics of his disappearance shouldn't exist. But Brian Schaffer proved that sometimes people can simply vanish. March 31, 2006, Columbus, Ohio. Spring break had finally arrived at Ohio State University. Brian Schaffer was everything you'd expect from a second-year medical student. Brilliant, dedicated, laser-focused on becoming a doctor. At 27, he carried the weight of academic excellence like a badge of honor. But beneath that driven exterior, Brian harbored a secret longing. He dreamed of ditching medicine entirely, becoming a beach bum in Puerto Rico, maybe starting a band. The pressure was crushing him, though no one knew how desperately he wanted to escape. William Clint Florence had been Brian's roommate and remained his closest friend. Loyal, dependable, the kind of guy who'd drop everything for a night out. Clint would be Brian's companion on this final evening, sticking by his side through every bar they visited. But within weeks, he would refuse every polygraph test offered by police and private investigators alike. Alexis Wagoner was Brian's girlfriend and fellow medical student. She loved him completely, trusted their future together, and was visiting family in Toledo that weekend. Brian had been planning to surprise her with a marriage proposal during their upcoming Miami vacation. She had no idea how close she'd come to becoming his fiancée. Randy Schaffer had recently buried his wife, Brian's mother, after her battle with cancer. The grief was still raw, but Randy remained devoted to his son. Within days, he would launch the most heartbreaking search of his life. It was supposed to be a celebration, spring break freedom, after brutal exams. Instead, it became the beginning of an impossible mystery. 9 p.m. The Ugly Tuna Saloon buzzed with end-of-semester energy as Brian met Clint Florence for their celebration. The second-floor bar in the South Campus Gateway complex was their usual spot. Familiar, comfortable, the perfect place to kick off spring break. Brian seemed exhausted from studying through the night earlier that week, but his spirits were high. At 10 p.m., Brian stepped outside to call Alexis in Toledo. His voice carried excitement and affection. "I love you. I can't wait for Miami." The call lasted several minutes, Brian sharing his anticipation for their upcoming trip, the proposal ring already purchased and hidden. Alexis would later remember this conversation as the last time she heard happiness in his voice. By 10:30 p.m., restless energy pulled them toward the Arena District for a proper bar crawl. They had a system, one shot of hard liquor at each establishment, no more, no less. Brian was methodical even in his partying. The alcohol accumulated steadily through the night as they moved from venue to venue. Brian's coordination gradually compromising, his words becoming looser, his judgment dulling with each stop. 1:15 a.m. brought them back to where the night began. Meredith Reed, a friend of Clint's, had offered them a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloon for one final round. Security cameras captured all three ascending the escalator to the main entrance. Brian slightly unsteady but walking under his own power, Clint beside him, Meredith following behind. Inside the crowded bar, something shifted between the friends. Witnesses reported a verbal altercation between Brian and Clint, though the specific details remain locked away. The argument wasn't physical, but tension crackled between them during those final minutes together. Neither man ever publicly revealed what sparked the disagreement. At 1:55 a.m., surveillance cameras outside the bar captured Brian engaged in conversation with two women, Brighton Zatko and Amber Ruick. The exchange appeared casual, friendly. Brian seemed relaxed despite his earlier argument with Clint. After a few minutes, he said goodbye to the women and turned toward the entrance. His final audible words to anyone, "I'm going in to talk to the band." Those grainy surveillance frames freeze Brian mid-stride, walking toward the ugly Tuna Saloon entrance. His left foot is raised, his body angled toward the doorway, his face partially visible in profile. The timestamp reads 1:55:56 a.m. This single moment, captured in black and white, preserved in digital memory, represents the last time Brian Shaffer was ever seen by anyone, anywhere. No security camera, no witness, no friend or stranger would ever report another confirmed sighting. The man who walked into that frame would never emerge from it. The clock would continue ticking. The bar would close, patrons would leave. But Brian Shaffer had already vanished from reality itself. 2 a.m., last call at the ugly Tuna Saloon. Clint Florence and Meredith Reed watched patrons stream toward the exit, scanning every face for Brian. They called his phone, straight to voicemail. They checked the bathroom, the back corners, even asked the bartender. Brian was simply gone. Initially, they assumed he'd left on his own, maybe caught a ride home without telling them. College students do impulsive things. By morning, that assumption would crumble. Police began their investigation by reviewing every frame of surveillance footage from the ugly Tuna Saloon and surrounding businesses. The digital evidence was undeniable. Brian enters at 1:15 a.m. with Clint and Meredith. Brian re-enters alone at 1:55 a.m. But despite cameras covering the main entrance and service areas, no footage exists of Brian leaving through any monitored exit. The cameras that should have solved this case instead created an impossible paradox. The first major discovery came at Brian's apartment on King Avenue, just 6 blocks from the bar. His car sat parked outside, exactly where he'd left it. Inside the apartment, his bed was made with military precision. Medical textbooks arranged neatly on shelves, everything suggesting a man planning to return. This told investigators Brian hadn't planned a disappearance, but offered zero clues about his actual whereabouts. The second discovery proved more intriguing. Deep within the ugly Tuna Saloon building, investigators found a service exit leading to a first-floor hallway. This hallway connected to an active construction zone with its own exterior door, completely unmonitored by security cameras. This route could explain Brian's vanishing act, except navigating the construction area while intoxicated would have been treacherous. Cadaver dogs deployed to search the area detected no traces of human remains, leaving this potential escape route as puzzling as everything else. 6 months later, the third discovery electrified everyone involved. Alexis called Brian's phone during her nightly ritual of hoping for an answer. Instead of immediate voicemail, the phone rang 3 times before going silent. Cell phone records showed a ping from a tower in Hilliard, 14 miles northwest of Columbus. For one brief moment, hope blazed. Maybe Brian was alive. But Singular quickly deflated that hope, attributing the incident to a technical glitch in their system. The broader search efforts consumed enormous resources but yielded nothing. The Olentangy River was dragged repeatedly. Columbus City workers opened manholes, searching miles of sewer tunnels. Dumpsters throughout the campus area were emptied and examined. Hospital emergency departments were contacted. Homeless shelters were checked. Missing person flyers blanket the city. Volunteers combed riverbanks and wooded areas. Private investigators joined the effort. The FBI was consulted. Psychics offered theories. Every lead was pursued. Every tip investigated. Every possibility explored. But after thousands of man-hours, hundreds of interviews, and exhaustive physical searches, law enforcement faced a maddening reality. They had found absolutely nothing. No body, No belongings, no witnesses, no credible sightings. Brian Shaffer had achieved the impossible: complete disappearance from the physical world. The disappearance consumed everyone who loved Brian, but each person grieved differently. Alexis Wagoner developed a heartbreaking nightly ritual. Every evening before bed, she called Brian's phone just to hear it ring, clinging to that small connection to the man she'd planned to marry. For months, the calls went straight to voicemail, his recorded voice the only piece of him she had left. That night in September, when it actually rang 3 times, it was one of the best sounds I ever heard, even though no one answered. The hope in her voice was crushing. 3 rings that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. Randy Shaffer threw himself into the search with desperate intensity. Already devastated by his wife's death weeks earlier, losing Brian pushed him toward increasingly desperate measures. A psychic told him Brian's body lay in the Olentangy River near a bridge pier. Randy believed her. "Derek and I put on waders and searched every inch of that river," he later told friends. "We checked under every bridge, behind every fallen tree. We never stopped looking." Father and son spent countless hours knee-deep in cold water, hope driving them through each fruitless search. Derek Shaffer harbored darker suspicions about that final night. His brother's best friend, Clint Florence, had been the last person to see Brian alive, yet refused every request for a polygraph test. If Brian decided to disappear and start over, Clint would know, Derek insisted. The fact that he won't take a polygraph, that's odd. The refusal ate at Derek, creating a rift of suspicion that would never heal. Randy kept meticulous notes of every tip, every sighting, every lead, no matter how absurd. His kitchen table became a command center covered in maps, photos, and handwritten theories. He documented everything, determined that persistence would eventually bring his son home. He had no idea his own time was running out. September 2008, Columbus, Ohio. 2.5 years after Brian vanished, tragedy struck the Shaffer family again. Randy Shaffer died outside his home during a violent windstorm. A massive tree branch, torn loose by hurricane-force winds, struck him as he walked to his car. Neighbors discovered his body the following morning. The man who had searched tirelessly for his missing son, who had waded through rivers and followed every lead, was gone. Brian would never know his father had died, still looking for him. The cruel irony wasn't lost on investigators. Randy had survived losing his wife to cancer and his son to an impossible disappearance, only to be killed by a random act of nature. His detailed notes and theories died with him, taking years of accumulated insights to the grave. But Randy's death forced a cold examination of the central puzzle that had tormented him. How does a 6'2" man vanish from a monitored second-floor bar with limited exits? The service exit provided a theoretical answer. Brian could have used the unmonitored door leading to the construction zone, navigated the dangerous debris and equipment while intoxicated, and escaped through the exterior door. This route would explain his absence from surveillance footage. Yet the scenario raised disturbing questions. Why would someone heavily under the influence of alcohol choose the most treacherous path out of a building? The construction area was filled with hazards: exposed rebar, loose concrete, unstable flooring. One misstep could be fatal. Cadaver dogs had searched that construction zone extensively without detecting human remains. If Brian had fallen and died there, the dogs should have found him. If he'd successfully navigated the area and escaped, he'd accomplished a feat of coordination that seemed impossible given his condition. Drop your theory in the comments. Did Brian use that service exit, or is there something else we're missing? The investigation revealed troubling gaps in witness cooperation. Multiple people connected to that final night had never been fully transparent about their knowledge. Clint Florence's repeated refusal of polygraph tests stood out most prominently, but other inconsistencies emerged. Small details didn't align. Stories contained holes. The complete truth about Brian's final hours remained locked away in the memories of people who chose silence over revelation. 19 years later, those secrets continue to haunt the case, leaving Brian's fate suspended between possibility and proof. Days after Randy Shaffer's funeral, family members gathered around a computer to read condolences in his online obituary guestbook. Among the heartfelt messages from friends and neighbors one entry stopped them cold. To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands. The message electrified the grieving family. Could Brian really be alive? The Virgin Islands aligned perfectly with his dreams of island life, his desire to escape the pressures of medical school and become a beach bum. Maybe he had survived. Maybe he'd been living in paradise all along, unable or unwilling to return home. The family's hearts raced with possibility. Their years of searching might finally be over. Derek Schaffer immediately contacted Columbus police, who launched an urgent investigation into the message's origin. If Brian was alive, if he was reaching out after his father's death, this could be the breakthrough everyone had prayed for. Media outlets in the Virgin Islands were notified. Local authorities began checking records and conducting searches. The truth came back like a physical blow. Investigators traced the IP address to a public computer terminal in Franklin County, Ohio, the same county where Brian had disappeared 2.5 years earlier. The message had been posted from right there in Columbus, likely by someone who knew the family's pain and chose to exploit it. It was just someone's sick idea of a joke, posted from right here in Columbus, Derek later said, his voice hollow with disappointment. The hoax was unspeakably cruel. Someone had watched this family endure years of agony, had seen Randy die still searching for his son, and decided to twist the knife deeper. They'd given the Schaffers hope at their most vulnerable moment, then snatched it away with the revelation of their own malice. But investigators were about to make a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about that final night. Clint Florence's behavior in the weeks following Brian's disappearance raised immediate red flags for investigators. While everyone else connected to that final night cooperated fully with police, Clint repeatedly refused polygraph tests. The Columbus Police Department requested one. He declined. Private investigator Don Corbett, working for the Schaffer family, offered another. Clint refused again. His attorney, Neil Rosenberg, defended the decision in a 2008 email to investigators. Clint has nothing new to tell you. He's been totally upfront and honest from the beginning. But Rosenberg's next statement proved more revealing. As far as my client is concerned, this matter is closed. We've been led to believe after speaking with the detective involved that Brian is alive and causing his family pain and hardship. The contrast was stark. Meredith Reed, who had driven Brian and Clint back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night, immediately agreed to a polygraph test and passed without issue. Randy Schaffer submitted to testing and cleared it completely. Even Brian's girlfriend Alexis cooperated fully with every investigative request. Only Clint Florence remained silent behind his lawyer's protection. His refusal became a permanent shadow over the case, leading many to wonder what secrets he was protecting. Security expert Michael Torres analyzed the Ugly Tuna Saloona's layout and camera coverage for investigators. The second-floor bar occupied a unique position within the South Campus Gateway complex, with the main entrance monitored by multiple camera angles. The coverage was actually quite comprehensive for the time period, Torres noted. Every patron entering or leaving through the primary access point would have been recorded. But Torres identified the critical weakness, the service exit. This door, located near the back of the bar, connected to a first-floor hallway that led directly into an active construction zone. The construction area had its own exterior door, completely unmonitored. Construction supervisor Dave Martinez testified about the hazardous conditions Brian would have faced. That area was a maze of debris, exposed rebar, loose concrete blocks, and unstable subflooring. Even in daylight with full sobriety, it would be dangerous. For someone intoxicated at 2 a.m., nearly impossible to navigate safely. The floor plan revealed the cruel irony of Brian's situation. The monitored exits were clearly marked and well lit. The unmonitored exit was hidden, dangerous, and almost certainly unknown to casual bar patrons. Why would someone choose the most perilous route out of a building? Retired Sergeant John Hurst, the case's original lead detective, remained haunted by the investigation's ambiguity. We really have nothing to substantiate either claim. Whether he was a victim or disappeared voluntarily, Hurst admitted. The physical evidence just isn't there for any theory. Forensic psychologist Dr. Patricia Kellerman analyzed Brian's mental state during his final weeks. he was carrying an enormous psychological burden. His mother's recent death from cancer, the crushing pressure of medical school, and his internal conflict about his chosen career path created a perfect storm of stress. Some people break under that kind of pressure. But Dr. Kellerman noted the contradictions in a voluntary disappearance theory. Brian had concrete plans for his future. He'd purchased an engagement ring, booked a vacation with his girlfriend, and was actively planning to propose marriage. People planning to disappear don't typically make such significant commitments just days before vanishing. The beach bum dreams Brian had expressed to friends suggested escapist fantasies, but fantasies and actions rarely align so dramatically. Most people who dream of running away to tropical islands never actually do it. Cadaver dog handler Sarah Mitchell deployed her team throughout the construction zone adjacent to the Ugly Tuna Saloona. "My dogs are trained to detect human decomposition even months after death. If Brian had died in that construction area, we would have found evidence. The fact that we detected nothing suggests either he wasn't there or he passed through quickly without incident." The absence of scent traces puzzled investigators. If Brian had used the service exit while heavily intoxicated, some evidence should have remained: torn clothing, blood from a fall, anything indicating his passage through the hazardous area. Technology expert James Reed examined the cell phone ping that briefly raised hopes 6 months after Brian's disappearance. Singular's explanation of a technical glitch is convenient but questionable. Cell phones don't randomly ping towers without some kind of network activity. Either the phone was briefly active, or there was a more complex technical malfunction than they've admitted. Missing persons expert Lisa Crawford provided the statistical context. Voluntary disappearances by educated adults with strong family ties are extremely rare. Most people who choose to vanish are fleeing debt, criminal charges, or abusive relationships. Brian Shaffer had none of those motivations. Statistically, he was far more likely to be a victim than a voluntary missing person. The experts agreed on one thing: nothing about Brian Shaffer's disappearance fit normal patterns. 19 years of investigation have produced 3 competing theories, each compelling, each fatally flawed. Theory 1: foul play. The scenario unfolds like this. Inside the crowded Ugly Tuna Saloona, the verbal argument between Brian and Clint escalates beyond words. Maybe it's about Alexis, maybe about Brian's plans to leave medical school, maybe something entirely different. The confrontation turns physical in a secluded corner of the bar, away from witnesses. Brian is injured, knocked unconscious, perhaps killed. Clint and possibly an accomplice face an impossible situation: a body in a monitored building. But they know about the service exit, the construction zone, the unmonitored exterior door. Under cover of darkness and chaos, they move Brian's body through the treacherous construction area and dispose of it elsewhere. This theory explains Clint's refusal to take polygraph tests, his attorney's defensive statements, and the complete absence of Brian from surveillance footage. The argument provides motive, the service exit provides method, and the construction zone provides opportunity. But where is the body? Extensive searches of the Olentangy River, surrounding areas, and potential disposal sites have yielded nothing. Moving an unconscious or deceased 170-pound man through a dangerous construction zone while avoiding detection would require extraordinary planning and luck. The logistics seem nearly impossible. Theory 2: voluntary escape. Brian's psychological profile supports this scenario. Crushed by his mother's death, overwhelmed by academic pressure, trapped in a career path that suffocated his dreams of freedom, Brian reaches a breaking point that night. The argument with Clint becomes his catalyst for action. He uses the service exit deliberately, knowing it's unmonitored. Despite his intoxication, adrenaline and desperation guide him through the construction zone. He emerges into the Columbus night and disappears, perhaps catching a ride, perhaps walking to a predetermined meeting point. Within hours, he's left Ohio forever, pursuing his dream of island life under a new identity. His attorney's statement that police believed Brian is alive supports this theory. The cell phone ping 6 months later, despite Singular's glitch explanation, could represent a moment of weakness when Brian briefly turned on his old phone before discarding it forever. But Brian's commitment to Alexis contradicts a planned disappearance. The engagement ring, the Miami trip, the genuine excitement in his final phone call to her, all suggest a man building a future, not planning to destroy it. Most devastatingly, Brian never contacted his family after Randy's tragic death in 2008. What kind of son, no matter how desperate to escape, wouldn't reach out after learning his father died searching for him? Theory 3. Accidental death. The simplest explanation remains the most elusive. Heavily intoxicated, possibly disoriented from his argument with Clint, Brian attempts to leave through the service exit. The construction zone's hazards prove fatal. He falls, strikes his head, becomes trapped under debris, or suffers some other fatal accident. His body remains hidden within the construction area, perhaps buried under concrete poured during subsequent construction phases, or moved by natural forces to an undetectable location. This theory requires no malice, no elaborate planning, no psychological breakdown, just bad luck and poor judgment amplified by alcohol. But cadaver dogs found no traces in the construction zone. Professional search teams combed every possible location. If Brian died accidentally in that area, some evidence should have survived. Each theory crumbles under scrutiny. The surveillance footage that should provide answers only deepens the mystery. In 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released age-progressed photos showing what Brian might look like at 42, keeping hope alive for those who believe he's still out there. If you're still watching, you're one of us. Smash that like button and share this case. Someone out there knows something. After 19 years, the question remains, how did Brian Shaffer leave without being seen? The Brian Shaffer case remains officially active with the Columbus Police Department. A $2,500 reward still sits unclaimed, testament to nearly 2 decades of fruitless investigation. Tips continue trickling in, sightings from Florida beaches, airport security footage from distant cities, social media photos of men who might be Brian at 42. Each lead is investigated. Each lead leads nowhere. The personal toll has been devastating and permanent. Alexis Wagoner graduated medical school on schedule despite her grief, rebuilding her life piece by careful piece. But it took years before she could dismantle what her family called the Brian Shrine, the collection of photos, letters, and mementos she'd kept hoping for his return. She thinks about him daily, she's admitted, trapped between accepting his death and believing he might walk through her door. Derek Shaffer carries his own burden of suspicion. He remains convinced that Clint Florence knows more than he's revealed, that Brian's best friend holds the key to solving this impossible disappearance. The refusal to take polygraph tests continues to haunt Derek, a wound that won't heal. The case transcended local tragedy to become a cultural phenomenon. Eddie Vedder, lead singer of Pearl Jam, Brian's favorite band, took time during a Cincinnati concert to ask the audience for information about the missing medical student. The gesture touched millions but yielded no useful leads. Brian Shaffer's disappearance has become one of the most discussed cases in true crime history, analyzed in countless podcasts, documentaries, and online forums. His story represents the perfect mystery, impossible circumstances, compelling theories, zero resolution. The escalator Brian climbed on his final night still operates today in the South Campus Gateway complex. But the Ugly Tuna Saloona closed years ago, taking whatever secrets it held to the grave. The space sits empty now, a monument to unanswered questions. In our age of surveillance cameras and digital footprints, Brian Shaffer proved that complete disappearance remains possible. His case reminds us that some mysteries resist every attempt at resolution, leaving families suspended in permanent limbo between hope and grief. Technology promises answers, but human behavior still defies prediction. Subscribe to TCI Crime Stories for more impossible cases and tell us in the comments, what would you investigate next about Brian's disappearance? Somewhere, Brian Shaffer's story continues. We just don't know where, how, or why.